My name is Thomas Beckman. Okay, I guess I'll begin at the beginning. Uh, let's see. One night when I was a kid, about 8 years old, I was awakened by a noise outside my bedroom window. I lifted my head off the pillow, straining to hear. We lived in a rural town back then, and the only sounds I usually heard were the wind in the trees and the occasional dog barking somewhere in the distance. I listened intently for a minute or so, but everything was quiet. Just as I was about to lay back down, I heard it. A man's voice. Not father's. Deeper than his. Saying, "I'm outside your house." I was so shocked that my body jerked back the way an animal's body might do when it senses danger is near. Sitting up in bed, then, staring out the window, I heard the voice a second time. "I'm outside your house." I don't know how, but I knew in that instant that the voice was speaking to me, alone, and I confirmed that it was not father's. I leapt up, fingers pulling back on the Venetian blinds, and peered through the dirty glass that separated me from the wind and the dark. No one. Just the night. The trees with their swaying branches. The glistening remnant of a brief fall of rain. Frightened, I tiptoed quickly across the creaking planks of my wooden floor to my open bedroom door and stood there, facing the darkness of the hallway, stiff as a post, wondering if I should wake father and whether it were possible that I imagined the whole thing. Then from the distance, down the stairwell, I heard through that darkness the front door creak slowly open, and then a moment later, slam loudly shut. "I'm in your house," the man said calmly, calling up to me. That voice kept me from moving forward into the darkness of the hallway. I closed the door as gently as I could and then backed away from it, until I felt my legs against the end of the bed. I got back in it and I laid there, still as death, buried beneath my covers, taking rapid short breaths, trying hard not to make a sound. The wooden stairwell creaked as with a heavy weight ascending on each step. And then, "I'm coming up the stairs." Terror rolled over me. I felt it welling up in my throat. I wanted to call out to father, but feared alerting the intruder as to where I was hiding. I wouldn't have been able to make a sound anyway. I don't think. So thick my throat felt. I then heard my bedroom door click open. I squeezed my eyes tightly and prayed I was dreaming. Then silence, until something reached the side of my bed, and I didn't just hear, but felt him say, with hot breath, "I'm by your bed." That feeling of horror that had me paralyzed suddenly transformed itself into motion. Desperately, I threw off the covers and let out a shrill cry. But there, in the faint glow of light from the window, I made out no shapes. I saw no one standing nearby. I had heard someone. I had felt his presence. I knew I couldn't have imagined what had just happened. The lather of sweat on my body, a body that was gasping for breath, those things were real. I stood up, my hands outstretched to defend myself, my eyes darting to and fro in the dim light from the window, searching for the man I knew had to be in my room. My bare foot brushed against something rubbery, and I leapt away from the bed to look. There, extending from beneath the bed, I saw what appeared to be the soles of two dirty Nike sneakers. Not mine. A quick flip of the nightstand lamp confirmed it. The shoes were still, but not so still that I couldn't question whether it was really a living thing under there. The body those shoes were on was so big that it was pushing up my mattress, It was as if he were now hiding from me, but not very well. Like a kid who thinks he can't be seen when hiding his head behind a curtain. I stood there afraid and confused at the large man under my bed. At the time, and I don't know why, maybe it was instinctual, I touched my forehead, my stomach, and then both my shoulders. And that's when I heard a cracking sound, a sort of splintering sound, the way a frozen lake might sound when it's melting. I watched the lump in my mattress begin to decline. The man under my bed, as I soon discovered, had fallen apart. He'd broken into pieces, like Legos dropped on concrete. Suddenly able to move again, I ran downstairs to Father's room and found, to my surprise, that he wasn't asleep. He was standing in the middle of his bed, dusting the ceiling fan. His room was as poorly lit as mine had been. The light coming through our windows the same, so I couldn't see all his features, just his body. His eyes, as they took in mine, and his extended arm holding the duster. I told him what had just happened upstairs. I thought surely he would have heard it all, given that he was awake and active in the space just beneath the floorboards that held my bed. Calm down, he said. You're only dreaming. And again more dusting. Dusting in the middle of the night, in a dimly lit room, a ceiling fan above his bed. I insisted he get down and come with me to my room. He moved methodically up the stairs ahead of me as I kept pace from behind. I stood behind him as he turned on the ceiling light in my bedroom. I pointed from behind his arm and said, "You see? There, the sneakers." Okay, he said, far too calmly. Nothing to be frightened about. I'm walking towards the bed. I'm descending to my knees. I watched as Father began scooping the strange man out from under my bed, piece by piece. His feet, shins, torso, a finger. The parts weren't bloody at the ends like you might expect, but somehow neatly sealed with skin, as if you were a mannequin, as if each part were its own piece of a mannequin. As Father pulled the man and what seemed like an inordinate amount of floor dust out, bit by bit, from under the bed, he looked back at me, speaking as though he were smiling. "See?" he said. "Nothing to worry about. I'm taking out his leg, now his shoulder. We just have to make sure we get all the parts so he doesn't come back." He was so flat-toned that his speech was strange to me. After a brief silence, I asked him, "Are you my father?" And only then did he look at me squarely, still kneeling by my bed. He began to shake, quietly trying to suppress a giggle, his smile preternaturally wide. He ended up bursting into loud laughter, and I half smiled, thinking that maybe this had all been a joke. Maybe he'd just been having some fun with me this whole time. Whoever this man was then lowered his head and covered his face. And, as if there were no other way to conceal his childlike embarrassment, laid on his belly and maneuvered like some large insect under my bed. Naturally, he couldn't fit under there either, with the lump that persisted in the mattress, and his legs remained out but motionless in the full light of the room. The silence was punctuated with occasional giggling, decreasing in volume with each successive wave until it was gone. There I stood, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, in a room filled with body parts except for the head, which I assumed was still under the bed, and a man who certainly wasn't my father, hiding under my bed just like the other man had. I tripped over myself turning into the hallway, running to the banister. Looking over, I saw Father coming up from the basement, rubbing his eyes as if he'd just woken up from a deep sleep. "What's going on up there?" he asked. I blurted, "Come quick!" The gasp of my voice must have convinced him I was scared, and he ran up the stairs and came with me into my room. "What is it?" he asked. And there before me was my room, as it had always been. Nothing out of order, no pile of body parts, no fake Father under the bed. I told Father what had happened. I really don't know how I got it all out. I started shaking, and he held me and told me that everything would be okay and that he, too, sometimes had nightmares. He let me sleep in his bed that night, and when we awoke, I tried to live my life as if everything was normal. I mean, I must have told that story over and over again 100 times. At first to the laughter of my friends and family, and then again to their concern. So I stopped telling it. I mean, I wasn't crazy. I'm not crazy. So I let myself be convinced that it had all just been the result of an overactive imagination. Over time, I tried to convince myself that Father was right, that I either imagined the whole thing or that it was a nightmare, after all. But I couldn't stop remembering what had for me been so real. That was 30-something years ago now. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. It isn't. You see, I drove down to visit Father, who still lives in that house, last week. I haven't been there in years. And in an attempt to overcome my fears, I decided to spend the night in my old room. Ever since that night when I was a boy, I hadn't slept in that room. So there I was back home again. And I wanted to set myself at ease by doing normal things with Father. We ate dinner together, a dinner that we prepared ourselves in the kitchen, just like we did when I was living there as a kid. I asked him about his health, whether he still played golf, how his favorite sports team was doing. Then I cleaned up the dishes, took my time washing them and putting them away, and straightened the kitchen up in other ways. All of this had been a kind of bedtime routine for us that would end with me getting myself ready for bed and, depending on the hour, starting in on my homework or reading leisurely if I didn't have any. Since I had a reason to retire early, I simply said goodnight to Father and walked upstairs. My mind was preoccupied with the memory, I guess, so I did everything now that I had done back then. I turned the hallway lights off and walked into my old room. Now, when I entered the room, I could tell immediately that something wasn't right. I mean, the ceiling light was out, and I could see inside only by the lamp on the nightstand. I looked from the lamp to the nightstand to the floor and the darkness beneath my bed. I listened to the distant rolling thunder outside the window, and I heard the wind brush against the screen before reaching the glass. It was then that I heard it again. From under my bed came the sound of a knocking, more like something repeatedly falling on the ground and bouncing than someone intentionally tapping the floorboards with his knuckles. I tried telling myself that it was silly to be scared, just the wind playing tricks through the echo of the room. I straightened up, walked boldly toward the bed, and crouched down. Nothing there. The sound stopped. I reached my hand out and patted the wooden floorboards. Nothing. I told myself that I was almost 40 and that this was ridiculous, that this childish fear, this superstition had to stop. I turned off the lamp and climbed into the bed, a bed which I had outgrown. The pale light from outside the window rested on the bedspread. I half smiled at the silliness of my fears and rolled my head back, bumping against something cold resting against my cheek. I leapt up and turned toward it. It was the rather large head, and only the head of what I had come to think of over time as the Lego Man. My jerking reaction caused it to roll from my pillow and hit the wall with a thump. The head then lay resting between the wall and my mattress. With its face pointing towards the ceiling, its eyes shifted to give me a side look. And through its smile, I heard it say, "I'm on your bed." At this point, I stopped telling my story and looked up at them, a circle of people among whom I was sitting. "I know what you're thinking," I said to them, "and I know how all this sounds. And I know what you'll tell me, that everyone in here has a story, an impossible story that seems to them just as real as this one seems to me, that I'm not bad, just unwell. But if none of that happened, how do you explain this?" I reached into my top pocket and pulled out a long, rubbery, but very real finger that had fallen on my shoulder before I had fled my room, stumbling on the strewn body parts that seemed to be, albeit haphazardly, pulling themselves together, as if materializing from the dust in the air. Perhaps it had meant to grab me, but I had grabbed it and yanked. I didn't even remember that it was in my hand until I reached the car. The fleshy part remained sealed at the end, like a piece of a mannequin, plastic-like and rubbery, but still so very, very warm.